Howdy, and welcome back to You've Got People Problems, where we tackle the leadership challenges that no one wants to talk about, but every business faces. I'm your host, Melissa Ortiz with Activate Human Capital Group, and this is episode 2. Today we're talking about feedback, the thing we all know is important but often struggle to get right. Too many leaders shy away from the tough conversations or rely on gut feelings instead of real insights. But data-driven feedback can remove judgment, build trust, and actually help people improve instead of feeling discouraged. I'm joined today by Emily Ransone and Vincent Korta, who have seen firsthand how effective it can be to transform feedback conversations using the right tools and methodology. In this episode, we'll explore why we hesitate to make tough people decisions and how to overcome that hesitation, how data makes feedback more effective, and how EOS tools help leaders give better feedback and build stronger teams. If you've ever struggled with feedback conversations or felt like they weren't making a positive impact, this episode will give you practical strategies you can use today. One quick side note, there was an issue with the first 30 seconds of the recording, so Emily's intro will be awkward. Please know that was my fault, not hers. Let's get to it.
Once you get really good at people, which is what we're going to talk about today, that's the good news, all the other 5 get easier and easier because your people touch all the other 5. What I find is that people shy away from the tough people decisions. And what I'm hoping is that we empower you today to lean into that and give you tools to do so. All right. The third key component are those tools. I'm so excited. Okay. So data are those tools that are going to give you not judgment, not from the standpoint of you judging people, but data that they can own. It's empowerment, it's accountability. Then once you get clear on vision, people, and data, it's like the horse where the blinders open up and you can see your world clearly. Those frustrations just start to bubble down into simplicity where you can then learn the methodology of how to solve those. That's what we call issues. That's the 4th key component. The 5th is process. Doing it the right and best way every time. That creates scalability, consistency that allows that scalability and higher profits because you're more efficient. Now, the 6th key component in my mind is also critical because we've got to see results fast in the business on your EOS journey. That's traction. We've got to get you results fast. So knowing those 6 key components, really the most important thing is making sure that you have equal pressure on those 6 key components. And guess what? Your visionary can't do that. They've got 20 great ideas and then squirrel, they're like off to the next one. So you've got to have Vince to be your integrator. If you're looking at an org chart, which is very different than an accountability chart, we don't have time for that today, but call me if you need me. But an org chart, it would be something like a general manager or a COO or master of operations or somebody that's keeping the equal pressure on the functions of the business, right? That's what Vince does. And early in the EOS journey, we got really clear that we needed Vince in that role and that he was right person in the right seat. Those are definitions you're going to hear us talk about today. So that's a great segue to my friend Vince and my EOS client. Thanks for being here, Vince.
Yeah, absolutely, Emily. Thank you for having me. Melissa, thank you as well for the invitation. Quick intro on my part. As Emily mentioned, the COO of To Be Living, also the CFO and acting as the integrator in our EOS journey. To Be Living is a third-party property manager in the Bay Area. We do mostly residential property management, but we do a bit of commercial as well. And I think we'll get into why we thought EOS was the way to go in a bit. But before we started with EOS, the firm was roughly 2,800 apartment units under management. That's definitely a metric that we were looking at even before EOS. And now we're over 4,500 units under management. So more than 50% growth. Some of that attributable to EOS. There's a little bit of a be wary what you wish for. If you start down this path and you put a vision in place, there's a good chance you're gonna hit it. Just make sure you know what you want. So that's a little bit about myself, and I think let's get into it. Absolutely, the data and the people. Emily hit it on the head. People are the backbone of any good business. If you can't measure your people well and do that with some objective data, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle to hit those goals that you set out for yourself.
Well, and I think it's important as Melissa starts to introduce herself to tie this together because really, if you're not optimizing talent, you're missing the boat. The talent is what's going to get you there. It can't come from one person. And usually what happens is it's the visionary dragging everybody in and dragging everyone around and having to force the energy. And if you can harness the tools, especially something like what Melissa is really an expert in, which is, really using an assessment tool to help you understand in black and white how to make that work, how to optimize that talent, then again, you're missing the boat. So Melissa, you take it from there.
Well, thank you for teaming me up. I am eternally excited about playing in this sandbox. I've been doing this for the last 17 years. I was attracted to Gallup, the Gallup poll company. They have a management consulting arm that developed the Q12, the employee engagement assessment. They have some amazing pre-hire assessments. And one job description got my attention, and it was effectively a talent optimization consultant. And I have been fascinated by what makes people tick. How do we get them in the right roles? What happens to their talent, abilities, enthusiasm, and energy when we get them in the right roles? And what are the consequences when they're not in the right role? What happens to their engagement, their energy, their physical well-being? And so all the tools that I've collected over the last 17 years have been in service of, whether it's in nonprofits, it's in the school district that I'm on the board for kids. How do we understand what's special about each person, put them in a place where they can shine and thrive? And so when we talk about people data on this discussion and we think about feedback, I think we often think about feedback as a negative thing. Need to give you some feedback. But a compliment is a great piece of feedback as well. Hey, you did that. The way you handled that irate customer was masterful. I hope you'll do more of that. Or I wish we had videoed that so we could put it on our playbook builder account. There's so many elements about why people act like they do. And what I see with leaders is if we can give them a shorthand Cliff Note version of, here's what makes this individual tick, it's easier for them to lean in with effective feedback, support that person, build a relationship quickly. And especially as we have more and more virtual remote team members, we've got to have better tools to do that more efficiently.
And to be clear, Vince does use an assessment tool. His company does use an assessment tool. So I think that has definitely an alignment piece about and a red thread through this conversation that we're doing today. And there's a staggering stat out there. This is, I think, from Harris Poll, if I'm getting this correct, $500 million loss in productivity in just the US every single year because people don't know their role in how to help the company achieve its mission. And what we've got, to your point earlier about the call you just had, we got a lot of quiet quitters. It's George Carlin. What he says is that I'm going to do just enough to not lose my job and get paid enough to just hang in there. I mean, that's so true, isn't it?
It's so true. And quiet quitters are absolutely not new to the marketplace. We've always had the rail cars that are just along for the ride. And, in the engagement space, we call these people not engaged. They're not fighting against us. They're not rowing against us in the rowboat, but they're sure not helping us get where we need to go. And part of that is because they haven't gotten good feedback. They're not in the right role. And we haven't given them metrics to know how to win. So many organizations out there don't give good metrics on tell me how to win as an employee because nobody wants to show up and suck at work every day. Yeah. Nobody wants that. But in the absence of those opportunities, they kind of go along for the ride. And so I would love to eradicate that.
In his book, Drive, if you all haven't read this, you can certainly download a quick summary. But he says people want three things in their role in the company. They want autonomy, mastery, and purpose. They want autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Hear that. They don't want more money, right? That's not what they're striving for. And so I think, the biggest thing is seeing, Vince, from your perspective, what you all did using EOS, using the assessment tool to hire better people, to get better results out of your people. It'd be great to kind of hear a little bit about that journey for you, starting with where you were pre-EOS to give us kind of the benchmark. That'd be a great place to start.
Sure, absolutely. And I'd say, before I even go there, we look at it from both that internally and I would say externally for the new hires, right? That data and people piece really work for both those groups, and they're equally as critical, and maybe even more so for the ones that are already on the team. But so just to take a step back in terms of pre-EOS and what we did, with our people and data. Yeah, I hate to say it, but there wasn't much of it with respect to data and metrics and how people were being measured. There was more or less it might have been ad hoc, or we did it at the end of the year. We would have a conversation around compensation, around feedback, but it was often subjective, or it was kind of, what have you done for me lately? What's happened in your role lately that I can point to? And the employee would invariably bring their opinions on what they thought they were doing well, and it would be a discussion around that. And there wasn't a framework, there wasn't structure to begin with. And that caused,
And it was too late to effectively make any change because it was end of year, right?
right. So not only is it too late to make any changes, but also just the facts that you were dealing with were in two different places, right? The employee might say, well, I'm not even quite sure why you're frustrated with this. I didn't know that was part of my job. And the manager is saying, how did you not know this was part of your job? Well, maybe there was some communication that was lacking there. There wasn't the data, the metrics put in place ahead of time. And, Melissa, I think you were saying it, but it's the people, employees, anyone really strives off knowing, the purpose. What are they there to do? And then how is that connected to the broader vision, goals of the firm? At the end of the day, we really saw that unlock with EOS, and really I think EOS is a really great system. We'll get into that. The assessment, there's different ones to use. We can get into some of the differences, but just having that structure that provides your employees with what's expected of them, how can they be successful, Melissa, to your point, how can they win? Explain to them how they can win, and you'll find that you're just going to unlock the potential of the people on your team that are already there, and find out pretty quickly the ones that aren't interested or that have already, quote, quiet quit. They'll likely move on once they realize, like, okay, this is what's expected of me. I'm not really going to be able to hit that. That's not something that I'm actually interested in anymore. And it don't, in some cases, solves itself. But at the end of the day, it's certainly a lot easier to have those conversations around feedback, positive and constructive, when they're around a set of facts, a set of metrics that everybody understands and has agreed to ahead of time.
Emily, that's so helpful, Vince. I actually want to go back to something, Emily, you said earlier about it's not about the money.
Yeah.
Because every exit interview ever, what do they say? It's about the money.
It's usually they don't leave the company, they leave a bad boss.
They absolutely do. But what do they say? They say, well, money. They never say the real thing. And so then we have bad data that's being capped on unrealistic beliefs. And so I wanted to just iterate that for a moment, because it's true in the employee engagement data. When we see turnover, it's because of a lack of clear expectations. It's a manager relationship they couldn't get there on. It's team connections that weren't there. They just clearly weren't part of the tribe. It was a cultural problem, but so few people are self-aware enough to explain those things in an exit interview. And they figure, if I say it's about money and they offer me a lot more, probably tolerate this and stay for a while. And so I wanted to kind of put a pin in that, because I've seen that play out so many times in the data, and it simply isn't true. It feels like it should be true, but it's not.
Whenever we're, having to let someone go, we always say less is more, stay as little as possible, right? The same is true on the other side of the table. When they're leaving, they're saying as little as possible, and they're really just wanting to play nice in the sandbox and get out of there. So of course they're not going to give you the truth, really.
That's the problem. So Emily, give us a little context. You've been helping companies implement EOS for 6 years now. Is that right?
It's interesting. I've been in the EOS world for probably over a decade, and as an implementer, certified implementer, about 6-ish years. And yeah, I love this work. It's so meaningful. It's so purpose-based. I get to see people not only become better business owners, better leaders, I also get to see them level up as human beings. They get more of what they want out of their life.
When you think about your client interactions, say over the last 6 to 12 months, what are the main people issues you're seeing today? And do any of them relate to feedback
I
on this
hate to
topic?
say it, but I think Vince nailed it on the head. So thank you, Vince, for teeing that up so nicely. One is inconsistency. We don't have a common process for how we handle onboarding, training, that new employee experience, getting them on board and traded in a 30, 60, 90. Then we don't have an existing employee experience where we're doing career progression and we're calling them, you can call them one-on-ones, quarterly conversations, I don't really care. But a lot of times it gets conflated where we're talking about moving a project forward and schedules and things like that. And we're conflating it with thinking that we're giving them feedback. You need to decouple those. That is keeping a project on track. That is not about having a true one-on-one, about how are you doing? Here's how you're doing as it relates to core values. It would be even better if you did this, right? And giving some specific examples. Then talking about their role. How are you feeling in your role? Do we need to go back and really make sure we're clear on expectations on your role? Am I giving you the time, attention, and tools on your role? Having a simple, effective 3 to 5 point agenda, 30, 45 minutes, maybe even making it a walking meeting, but certainly not sitting across the desk from someone that certainly feels pretty darn icky, like you're going to the principal's office. So we're very inconsistent. And then the same is true for the end of life. If we do this well, I recommend Reid Hoffman's book. He's the fellow from LinkedIn that wrote Tour of Duty. He talks about modeling it after the military, where it's a 3 to 5 year role. And if we're crystal clear on what we expect out of that role, and we're seeing excellence as it relates to core values, right people, that's what EOS calls it from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, right people, core values. And if they're doing the right job and really growing in that and bringing their all to it, that's right seat. They match their accountability chart seat. That's a job description. If they are right people in right seat, then guess what? They are in command of where they go with their career. I had someone in a sales role that said, I want to own my own business someday. I said, if you give me 3 to 5 years of your best, there is no intro I won't make for you. There is no recommendation I won't handle for you. There is nothing I won't do to show you the inner workings of a business from a leadership and ownership perspective so that you're ready when you get that opportunity. Guess what? Every time he had an interview, he came to tell me about it. And then he'd say, yep, I interviewed with SoFi as their director of facilities, wasn't right for me. And then when he did get that opportunity to own a business, it was at a 5-year mark where it was really time and healthy for us. Guess what? He got to fly, be free. It wasn't the right one. He was so hot in the market as a salesperson that he could have gone to any office furniture dealership. He came back to us.
Amazing.
I got another 3 to 5 years out of him. Pretty
Yeah.
amazing when you think about it, right? So that's the power of when you have an end-to-end employee experience that is consistent, that builds trust in ways you can't even see. When we are all over the map, each manager does their own version and says their own script and has their own agenda. What that means is you are actually taking withdrawals out of the emotional bank account. That's Stephen Covey, emotional bank account of every single person in your company. You're eroding trust. And guess what? You're taking away not only their dignity, you're undermining your own respect in your role. So that's,
and you also have as many cultures as you have managers. Rather than one cohesive culture that you're joining this culture, people join companies and leave managers, like you said earlier, Emily. That's why, because of that inconsistency. And I love that so much of what you detailed there was all feedback related. Onboarding, first 30, 60, 90, tons of feedback. Training, got to have lots of feedback. That career progression, it doesn't happen without feedback. So, Vince, I'd love to shift to you for a minute. Go ahead.
One of the biggest things that came out of our journey with EOS really early on, was this concept of right people, right seats. And it's just fundamental to a successful organization, because I'm sure, there's many business owners, business people out there, and you've got you've got many different roles at your organization, but you often go to the people first and you say to yourself, all right, well, where can I put this person, and can they fit into that role? Yeah, I probably can make it work. Instead of flipping that equation around and just looking at the roles you need for your successful organization, what are the responsibilities of that role? And then look around to the team you have and who fits the bill or who doesn't. And that was just like a completely different way for us to look at it. It's a little bit jarring at first because you might think to yourself, well, what if I'm not a fit? What if there isn't a role for me? And that, again, EOS really helped our leadership team, and we're now taking it to the next layer. There is a ton of self-awareness that happens in this process. And I don't want to be hokey about but it's totally true. And I'd actually push back a little bit now on the challenging conversations of like, oh, you say as little as you might in an offboarding, for instance. I think at least at the leadership level, we're in a place where we can be very candid with each other because we've built that level of trust. Even if it's
You've earned it.
slightly uncomfortable, you're much more willing to hear that now when you're in a place of trust and you want to know that you're in the right role and you're moving the company forward under a collective vision.
To
But
that
again,
end, I've got to give you huge kudos, Vince, because this is the panacea. When you all crystallized this, you brought a culture of anesthetizing people to feedback that it's just who you are. It's just the water you drink. So bravo.
yeah, I will say there's work to be done. There's standardizations that we're still trying to work on, for every role at every level of the organization. But we understand the concept, and that's frankly at least a big part of this. And Emily was talking about the onboarding and the hiring, and so that was the other piece I had mentioned earlier of this. Call it the external piece, or bringing new people on board. And this with our director of people ops, we've really started to spend much more time on it to standardize it, to make it helpful not only to the managers that are bringing on these new people, but even before we bring them on. How do we find out who is the quote right person? How do they fit with our core values? Well, we have found that and it's not the same question every time, but at least having a standardized set of questions that can get at these answers for what our core values are, what's important to us. And then similarly, on the GWC, if you get into EOS, you'll start to hear these acronyms, but the gets it, wants it, capacity to do it, part of the job, right? Do they get it? Do they actually want this job, or are they just looking for something to do? And do they have the capacity to do it? Though all those things are critical to a successful person in the right seat. Well, how do you get at that in a standard way where it's not just, well, if I'm interviewing them, it's going to be one way. If somebody else is doing it, it's going to be a different way. We're going to get a different result. And so that's where the standardized assessments are helpful. Melissa has some tools around that. We use some tools at 2BL, and even others, like even simple as like an Excel test or a detail-oriented test. I can't stress how helpful that has been for us to be able to test everybody objectively across the same set of things and see the feedback we get.
You hit on something, Vince, that I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Melissa.
I was just going to ask, Vince, how far into your EOS journey did you take on a good behavioral assessment? And I'm a little bit agnostic when it comes. It's like DISC, Strengths Finder, Predictive Index, Myers-Briggs. Find something you like and make that your language, because that's the power. It's not the best tool is Predictive Index. The best tool is DISC.
Yeah.
It's the one that resonates in your organization, and especially with your visionary and integrator, that will start to trickle down into the culture. So tell us where in the journey, and then maybe how have EOS and a good assessment helped you improve feedback and effectiveness?
Sure. So specifically around the assessment, I'll step back, specifically around how much time. So it's been almost 2 years. I think we're in our seventh quarter of EOS. So we're getting to we're looking forward to it. We're going to have our 2-day annual with Emily in the coming year in early 2025. So that'll be really exciting. We already did our first annual, which was a great experience. So about 2 years, we did our first DISC assessment maybe 7 or 8 months ago, but it was a small subset of the leadership team that took it as just sort of a trial run. And then I'd say about 4 months ago, we really leaned into it for our new hires. So it was actually, we were just doing it for anyone that we were looking to hire, and there were certain characteristics that we were looking for depending on the role, right? Are you going to be a leasing manager? Do you have kind of that sales motivation? We could see that in the role. Are you going to be an accounting manager? Do you have a strict, detail-oriented mindset? Follows, the rules clearly in an accounting job. That's important. So we would look for these sort of characteristics depending on the role that you were applying for. And then just recently, about a month ago, because we've seen the success of having this assessment, again, along with other tests, it's not just the assessment. We actually like having our own internal exams as well that will, depending on the role, that will have people take. But about a month ago, the leadership team took the DISC assessment in total, and we met with an outside consultant to kind of help us digest what that was saying in the interest of working even better with each other. I think we've done a great job of building a great leadership team that, again, I was mentioning earlier, trusts each other, is willing to listen even when it can feel uncomfortable, in the interest of, again, we view it, when somebody gives me feedback, even if it's seen as critical, I really do view it as, this is helping me become a better version of myself, be a leader to this group, and just be a better person in general. So that's roughly about the time that we've been using in this case, the DISC assessment.
When you think about specifically those feedback discussions, you're supporting
Sure.
people in their natural approach. Do you feel like it's that there's good language already there for you to use to praise them and address
So
issues? How
interestingly,
has it helped?
yeah. So I would say we haven't quite yet taken the assessment, like what's in the assessment, and then translated that into how we're going to give feedback to people, whether it might be different one way or the other. I think, I mean, personally, I would like to think I tailor feedback somewhat differently depending on who I might be speaking with, because I know them a little bit better. I know how they might react to certain information. But so we haven't quite taken it to that level for the managers to look at everyone's DISC assessment, for instance, and tailor their feedback. But in the absence of that, what we have done, and what I think helps frame the conversation and frankly make it easier for both sides, is this again, back to metrics, back to a common scorecard. We talk about that in EOS a lot. It's a lot easier to have a discussion when it's around, look, we all agreed that these were the three scorecard metrics that we were going to be looking at for you, either you in particular or for this group, and they're not there. Let's talk about why that might be. And I think that's at least one, helps it just take it out of the personal. And then two, then this takes some time. You've got to build a level of trust with your team. So whether it's at the leadership team level, whether it's, your direct reports, without that trust, I don't think people will accept the feedback, or if they do, it's kind of going in one ear and out the other. If they don't believe it's coming from a good place, a place where you're actually trying to help them get better, achieve their goals so that the firm can achieve its goals, then the feedback is, again, it kind of doesn't, it will not resonate with the folks, and that takes time. I mean, frankly, it just does. It takes time and some practice.
And they won't believe it's coming from a good place if it's not coming from a good place, right? That's part of the issue with self-awareness, is we think we can fake it. I don't really like this employee, I need to give them feedback. If it's not coming from the heart and a desire to actually help them be successful, they will know.
Yeah.
Right.
And what I will say, and then we maybe want to move on, I guess, but is specific and examples are one of, again, where you can take it out of the subjective, you can take it out of the personal, when you can be specific with your feedback and provide an example on the positive and the negative. And Melissa, you had said earlier, it's like, and then in property management, it might be, this resident came to you and they were very frustrated, and I could see where, you might have wanted to react potentially in an emotional way. You did a great job, property manager, by taking in the information, acting professionally, and you're very specific with that feedback and timely. I think that's another really big important is if you can with feedback is to do it in a timely manner, especially if it might be on the constructive or quote unquote negative. You don't want to call it a week later. Oh, so and so. Remember a week ago you were in that
Shouldn't save
meeting.
it for their 6-month review about how frustrated we were 4 months ago about something.
Right.
Usually say it's like puppies and babies. Like you've got to make it super recent, otherwise forget it.
It's just not going to translate.
Yeah,
It's not
let
going
it
to
go.
translate.
Let it
Look, I will say, and this was actually, I'll give another sort of personal example from our firm with EOS. Actually, Emily was there and sort of led us through this. Our leadership team was at our 1-year annual. We had a feedback exercise, and we had to give feedback, positive and negative, to everybody on the team, and receive that feedback as well, positive and negative, to everyone on the team. And you might think to yourself, oh my gosh, hearing that feedback, and especially the negative feedback, that's just going to feel really yucky. And I can't imagine having to sit through that. Well, the hardest part of that was actually giving the feedback. I mean, everybody in the room was just like turned up in knots in their stomach. And oh my gosh, I had to give feedback to Emily, and I tell her that, maybe this wasn't so great or that, but that was good. It was the giving the feedback that was the hardest part. And I think actually, if we can be a little bit of grace, maybe not at every level of employment, but certainly at the leadership team level, I would say when you receive some feedback, sit for a second and say, you know what, that was probably tough for this person to give me, or at least they had to frame it, and it maybe was hard for them to do because it wasn't positive, but it's more like almost a thank you for taking the time to give me that feedback. At least I mean, I'd like to think I do that when I get feedback, and it's not always positive. I know our visionary Brooks likes to give me plenty of critical feedback, and I like to take it. So, but that way, it was interesting in that moment of just when we realized, like, wow, it's actually the giving of the feedback is harder oftentimes than the receiving of it, even when it's positive.
It's a muscle that you just have to work on and
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. You're right.
You have to build it. Yeah, it's interesting. I'll share a recent example. Vince, it wasn't long ago that I was doing a performance review for a team member, and it was virtual. And I said, it was actually a performance improvement plan. And I said, I want to give you a moment. I'm going to walk away. I'm going to pull this performance improvement plan up, and I want you to read through it. And then I'm going to come back and we can talk through questions. And the employee in question said, this was so helpful. Thank you. And I feel like I have so much more clarity on how to improve. And I agonized about writing it. And my EOS implementer, Rainey Busby, was the one who gave me the template. And I just said, I know I have to do this and I hate it, but we have to do this for people. And because if we don't, we can't get better as teams. We can't get better as organizations. We can't get better serving our customers. And it's just so critical. So I just...
Look, I mean, it may seem simple, but again, at the end of the day, people want to know what they need to do to win, what they need to do to succeed. I mean, I bring it back to sports at times. Sports isn't very interesting if there's no score, right? It's like at the end of the day, how are we keeping score? And it's maybe not always points. It might be, what you're doing in your role on that team, and there's ways to score that. But there needs to be a metric, a score, a way to measure this. Otherwise, it's just not clear to the employer, to the team member on what they're doing and how it relates to the rest of the business, right? It's not, back to this idea of compensation too. It's not always how can what I do then lead to more money. It's how is what I'm doing in conjunction with other people's goals leading up to this vision that the rest of the firm is doing. And I mean, that is very, very true at To Be Living. We talk about it all the time now. We share the vision of the firm. We share the goals of the firm, and that is at every single level, so that whether you're a maintenance tech and you realize that the hours you're putting into our system then translates into billable hours, then translates into higher satisfaction scores and also revenue to the firm. or, and that goes on down the line with leasing managers, property managers. The roles they do have an impact to the rest of the firm's overall goals, and people feel like what they're doing matters. It's not just, I'm in a silo, I do my job, I go home, nobody really cares. It doesn't matter what I do, plus or minus. So that's it. It has a fundamental effect, the flywheel effect, good to great, that Emily was talking about. It's absolutely true. We've seen it over the last 18 months here at 2BL. It's been exciting to witness.
Yeah.
The
One
vision
of our
drives
employees,
your people to purpose, right? We talked about autonomy, mastery, and purpose from Dan Pink's book, Drive. You're tying every conversation at the company level, department level, and one-on-ones to purpose, so they feel like they're a part of something that matters, to your point. I love that.
one of our employee engagement survey items is my manager makes me feel my job is important. And that applies to every job. Why do we have this? Why does this job exist if it's not important? And if I can feel that as a team member, then I've got my purpose, right? So I think that's so poignant.
I would
I want to
say,
make sure we've got time for. We've got ourselves lined up for a couple tips, and I want to make sure there's time for Q&A. Those
Yeah.
of you attendees, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can. But Emily, I wanted to cover one more piece in the Q&A before we go on to the tips. You've mentioned to me in the past how many of your clients wait until there's an issue, there's a problem, there's a frustration to start thinking about improving feedback mechanisms. And you also said earlier that giving and receiving feedback is a muscle.
Yeah.
Tell us, why is it important to think about giving feedback sooner all along the life cycle rather than waiting until there's an issue to have the feedback conversation?
Yeah, what I see is that because we don't do this on a proactive, regular, consistent basis, and we're not investing, making deposits in the employee's emotional bank account, what happens is by the time we have to give critical feedback, it feels awful. It feels like we're judging them. We have no data to back it up, no examples to point to Vince, no specificity to point to what Vince said. And what it feels like is jarring and abrasive and awful for those that have to give it and horrible for those that have to receive it. You can stop that easily. It's going to feel good as well to you and to the person that you're working with. If you will follow what I said in the beginning, which is to be proactive, create a structure company-wide, create a simple 3 to 5 point agenda, make it short, 30, maybe 45 minutes, whatever you feel is appropriate. Make it a fun meeting where you're doing it over a cup of coffee and a donut, or walking, or sitting on the same side of the table. You want to gang up on the issue. Hey, this isn't working. What can we do about it? Gang up on the issue. Don't make the employee the issue. And if you will do these things on a proactive, regular basis, when you've got good to share, by the time you get to the point where there is some tough stuff to share, it's going to be so easy because you're already in it. You've already got the flow going. And sometimes while you're in the early stage of it, if you're not familiar with Kim Scott's work, Radical Candor, highly recommend it. There's Crucial Conversations. That's another one that I'd recommend. There's a lot of work out there that's already been done to how to give and receive feedback. I use carefrontational feedback steps. That's what I use because it's a simple 5-point approach. What I start with is, are you open to some feedback today? Because let's face it, sometimes they're just not. I had a leadership team I'm working with in the Burlingame area that said, wow, if so-and-so, if you would have let me know this, and you would have asked me that question that this was brewing, I could have told you, can you give me an hour? I'm triaging a situation right now. I can't hear you. And because you didn't ask me that question, I shut down. So the first thing you do is clear the decks. And if they say, I'm not available right now, then say, okay, within the next 24 hours, what works for you, right? Because recency matters, to Vince's point. puppies and kiddos. If you wait too long, they'll lose it. So again, you can use something like confrontational feedback steps. You can use something like the compliment sandwich. Start with a great one, Oreo cookie, start with a nice one, and then you can middle sandwich it, that yummy goodness, with, hey, this is going well, and it would be even better if. I love that phrase, even better if, because again, what you're saying is, you don't suck. I'm not judging you. What the data is showing is that this is working. This could be even better if you helped with this. What can I do to help you? And then tie it off. What I always say is, you've got to make it two-way. It's got to be give and receive, because if not, that feels pretty fake, doesn't it? If you're the one constantly giving that feedback. The last nugget that I want to share is that we think we can hold people accountable as leaders and managers. Guess what? That's a fallacy, my friends. They have to want it. What the tools will do is help them empower themselves to want it. You're creating a culture of empowerment and extreme ownership if you will use data-based tools, things like rocks that give them special projects quarter over quarter, scorecard measurables, or KPIs, whatever language you want to use. I don't care. It doesn't have to be EOS, but you've got to use something to take it out of you judging them and bring it into black and white. Just, this is what the data is showing. So enough?
This is great. This is great. I think we need to add to our tips, because some of the stuff that I took out of there earlier, you talked about decoupling our project conversations from our one-on-ones.
Yeah.
So powerful. The other thing you said that resonated with me so deeply, and I've seen this so much, is the physical posture of feedback, where we sit shoulder to shoulder. We're on a walk. We're tackling the issue rather than somebody tackling someone else.
Yeah.
And that physical posture can make such a difference in someone's receptiveness. So I'm going to add those to our basic tips that we were hoping to convey, and jump into those now, because this is really powerful stuff. And I hope you'll comment on these as we go through. The first one that we had talked about bringing forward was something, Vince, you covered really well when we talked about winning, metrics, data that we can see in black and white. And Emily, you just talked about that a little bit as well. So the tip is really, if we want our employees and teams to succeed, we have to define a win. We have to define the milestones along those wins. So whether it's the project, the role, the quarter, Vince, tell us what that looks like at To Be Living when you're thinking about defining wins for someone or a team.
Sure. I think so at To Be Living, specifically, and I'll say, before I guess I answer it specifically, this is where EOS, and as Emily mentioned, there's many other structures or frameworks around it, but really helped us. You need that framework, or at least we found that framework and structure was so critical to finally allowing us to unlock the power of the things we're talking about, right? There might be some people on this call listening in thinking, great, this all sounds good, but how? Like, how do you get this in place? And I think that's where To Be Living was, roughly 2 years ago, where we were all running around with a little bit chicken with their heads cut off. Emily was saying 20 different mountains that we were trying to climb, not totally sure how to do that. But in the back of our minds, there was the sense of like, well, if we could just corral this energy and put it on a track in the same direction, this could really be some powerful stuff. And that's what EOS allows you to do. That's what a good implementer helps you do. I would highly encourage, this is not something you want to do on your own, certainly in the first year. The tools that the implementer helps you put together and the framework they can help you build with EOS, for us, has been a huge success. And so that is, that's how it looks like at To Be Living now. And so, specifically, we have, whether it's at the leadership team level or one level below, we have a rock, for instance, so a quarterly target that's quote unquote SMART based. If you understand those SMART goals, you can Google it to get the acronym, but it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time bound. All those things are critical to making it not some fluffy goal that at the end of the quarter, you're like, did you complete it or did you not? If you can't measure it, then, it's going to be hard to say whether it was actually done or not. So that there helps to frame those conversations, to have the, how can I help you? I'm looking at these milestones, some specific ones. How can I introduce you to somebody else on the team that might be able to help you complete that milestone? It becomes more of a conversation around how can we get these things done so that you can win, so you can quote win by achieving this rock. The rock or goal leads to a scorecard measurable that will then, hopefully be achieved and lead up to company goals as well. I think that's what it looks like at To Be Living, where people's goals are specific. There has key measurables that then lead up to company related goals as well, that then drive financial success, but other things too that are really important to the company. Volunteering, that's something that we look at as well. How many hours or dollars are we putting back into the community? That's actually a measurable that we look at the leadership team level, a goal that we're trying to achieve. So all those, that's a little bit in detail on how we do that, how we do it specifically.
Interesting. As I'm working with clients, especially my EOS clients, but clients in general, so much of it's, if we can get the metrics in place, and then we can level up again by putting the people element in place, all that people data. So I was thinking in PI language, you've got somebody who's a really high A factor, the high dominance, high D in DISC. If we know that, we know they care about winning, they care about goals, they care about traction, they care about speed and decision making. You might have somebody who's on the other end of that spectrum, and what they care about is including others, collaborating with others, not rocking the boat. We can frame their specific goals differently, even the same goals, to bring them along. And so that level up, and then we get stronger as a team, we get better employee retention, we get a whole lot better performance. And so we just keep layering on to that effectiveness. So the next tip I was hoping to go through, Emily, was with you. You've talked a little bit about the frequency, the muscle that we're building around feedback. People don't know how they're progressing without feedback that's regular, that's proactive, that's consistent. And in EOS, you talk a lot about people have 90-day attention spans scientifically. And so this idea of an annual performance review is totally bogus. It's just not helpful. And people forget what their goals even were. It's kind of like the goals we set in January, kind of forgot about them. Maybe we wrote them down, maybe we didn't, but they weren't present in our lives. And so I'd love for you to talk about the many ways we can give employee feedback, how we can integrate it with a 90-day rhythm. And what do you think some of the harder feedback elements are to give for leaders?
Well, I think just getting it started is the hardest thing for leaders, really. I mean, if you can just get it started, really, that's what I see, is that they just don't even try. They don't start. So that's the biggest thing. Something is better than nothing and nothing. And if you will do it consistently with some structure, keep it simple. Like I said, a 3 to 5 point agenda. These are the things that really will, again, invest in trust. That's that emotional bank account that really does matter. That's to Vince's point about building trust so that they can hear you. So regular, consistent, proactive, those are the really key themes that if I had to bias towards anything, that's where I would start. Do what works for your people too. So if you need to give it, instead of a quarterly conversation, this natural 90-day biorhythm, right, that works in business and works in human psychology, great if that works for you. Sometimes, you know what, I've got teams that need to do it on a monthly basis or weekly, especially if they're dealing with a lot of dynamics. Then they can start to back off that need for more is more is more. So again, early on, I say bias towards simplicity, because you've got to be consistent. And if you can't, you'll quit. So hopefully that's enough based on everything we've already said, because I know we're trying to get to Q&A too.
Yeah. It's so powerful to be simple. And I can't underscore the start with trust, start with relationship. How are you doing?
Yes.
Because I had a client who was working with a team member they were very frustrated with, went into a performance review conversation and had the presence of mind to ask that question first. Found out there were some unknown major health issues going on in this person's life, and they were able to still give the performance feedback, But because they had that information going in, they would have given a totally different performance review and absolutely destroyed a strong relationship that they had built without that one question.
To that end, these quarterly conversations or one-on-ones, whatever you want to call them, should be the person owning the dialogue, not the leader and manager. It should be a 2-to-1 question to statement ratio. You should be talking less. You should be asking questions and engaging them to own and drive the conversation from their perspective.
Go ahead, Vince.
No, I was just agreeing with Emily. I think it's, especially once you have that framework and the measurables that everyone's looking at, it's have them answer the question. How do you think you're doing with respect to these measurables? And, most people are objective. So if they're there, they're there. And if they're not, we can talk about why they're not. And it doesn't need to feel like an attack.
Be comfortable with silence too. Give them time. If they're being quiet for a minute, give them time to process and respond. Don't fill that gap. Golden silence is beautiful.
Golden or uncomfortable.
Get comfortable being uncomfortable.
There you go. Don't fill the void. I agree with that too.
Ask the question and then shut up.
Mm-hmm.
So powerful. Okay, next tip, and I think we might have to skip the last one because I want to make sure we get your contact information out. We are totally blown by our Q&A time. This was a really valuable conversation. Don't skip the prep step. Take the time, put your thoughts down, make sure you get across what you want to get across, and start but in your heart getting grounded by what do I want for this person? How do I feel about this person? How can I encourage and champion this person? Because if you rush into it, you're going from meeting to meeting to meeting. And I am so often guilty of this. Take a minute, get grounded, think through, even if it's only 5 minutes of what you want to share and ask. That will make these any feedback. Compliment goes the same way. What exactly am I appreciative of?
Yeah. Well, couldn't agree more. I mean, a good job does nothing for employees. Great job. Okay, what did I do exactly? Why is it a great job? You just, it doesn't this is prepare, be specific with the feedback. But that preparation, it frankly, that shows you care, right? The employees, staff members, they're obviously not idiots. They're on your team for a reason. And if you don't prepare, they'll know. And then they're going to think to themselves, well, why do I show up here? Why do I need to prepare for this job? And it goes, we have found, just as a quick tip, there's software around helping this structure. It doesn't need to always be the case, but for the feedback, we use 90IO, and it helps calendar the feedback. It helps prep the feedback for both sides. As Emily was saying, it's got to go both ways. This helps the manager receive feedback as well. So just as as a potential option, but there's many ways.
That's our last tip anyway. Set it and
great.
Calendar this stuff way in advance. Bam.
Whether it's performance reviews, your one-on-ones, just get it on the calendar. You may have to move it, but get it there in the first place is a set it and forget it mentality. So maybe you won't forget it, but I'd like to pull up contact information. I'm so grateful to the two of you for joining me, Vince, Emily. Thank you. Thank you for helping me through the technology hiccups this morning, which
I got you, sister. I got you.
And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for what you do for communities, for teams. Emily, the EOS framework is great. It's such a beautiful pairing for the PI and employee engagement work that I do, because it's teams who are already investing in themselves getting better. So thank you to everyone who attended, and look forward to seeing y'all soon. The next session we're having, the next PI Power Hour, is around finding the needle in the haystack. How do we use these type of assessments to get through where we have more candidates on the market than we've had in a while? How do we cull down and really spend the time with the best candidates to make sure we get the right people in the right seats? So thank you, and see y'all soon.
Thank you, Melissa.
Right. Thank you, Melissa. See you, Emily.
Well, that's a wrap on this episode of You've Got People Problems. If you got something out of the conversation, make sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with the other leaders in your network, because let's face it, we all have people problems. You can watch full episodes on YouTube or listen on your favorite podcast app. But either way, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.